Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sandy and Sean on Mile High Sports. That's Sandy Clough. I'm Sean Drotar. Thanks for joining us today. Remember, if you've caught any of the programs before and you haven't had a chance, if you like what you see, click and subscribe down below. Make sure you get all of the latest from us every single weekday. Danny Bailey is the man who makes all of this work behind the scenes. Thanks to Danny for putting this together. Sandy, the mini camp for the Denver Broncos is in the rearview mirror. The next step is going to be training camp, where the rubber really hits the road regarding winning jobs, losing jobs, figuring out what the Denver Broncos will be as they go into this 2024 season, which will be the 9th season since the Broncos won Super Bowl 50. They're not going to win the Super Bowl this year either, unless a Simpsons-esque cavalcade of disasters happens to about 28 other NFL teams. But that's probably not the objective. Sean Payton finally seems in his second year as if he understands that this is a rebuild, that it is going to take time. The move to select Bo Nix was part of it. And when we look at the jobs, starting roles that may be available on this team for a bad team, as you figure that there will be a lot of them available. Yes, people first look at the quarterback competition, and we've talked about it here. There's not a competition. It's Bo Nix's job. But when you went back and looked at it, and it might be surprising, it even surprised me thinking to the tail end of it, of how many times the Broncos have had consistency between the head coaching role and the quarterback role. Because you think about the great pairings in the last 15 years, Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. You can think about over in with the Rams. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, Sean McVay and his quarterbacks. You're talking about so many different ways in which the coach and the quarterback together have to be on the same page.
I know you mentioned Mahomes, but
and that's not new,
mentioning
yeah,
a couple of times.
But I mean, that's
nothing new.
The quarterback-coach combo is generally what ends up getting you.
But before that was reading Alex Smith for more than 1 year, for years in succession.
Yeah.
So it isn't just the fact that the Broncos have gone now for. This will be the 11th straight year. They'll have some form of a new combination of coach and starting quarterback.
That's
hard to believe. One or the other, if not both, from year to year changes. And if you want to know the biggest reason that the Broncos have failed to make the playoffs for the last 8 years after winning Super Bowl 50, that's the biggest reason. Instability when it comes to the development of any kind of relationship between head coach and quarterback. And there have been a variety of reasons why that continuity has been broken apart from year to year. But you go back to 2014, you had Manning and Fox. Then Fox was fired or got resigned at the end of the 14 season, and Gary Kubiak was brought in. So it was Manning and Kubiak in 15. And then Manning retired, of course. So it had to be something different in 16. And it turned out to be Simeon and Kubiak. But then Kubiak retired at the end of the 16 season, at least as a head coach, he did. Simeon and Joseph in 17. In 18, it was Keenum and Joseph. In 19, it all changed with Flacco as the starting quarterback and Vic Fangio as the new head coach. Then it was Locke and Fangio in 20, Bridgewater and Fangio in 21, then a new coach and a new quarterback with great advance notice in 22. You had your coach for the future and your quarterback, who was a young 32, 33, whatever he was at the time, in Russell Wilson. That flamed out. They were both awful. And this past year, it was Sean Payton, who never wanted Russell Wilson, but had no other choice, really, at the quarterback position. And this year, it will obviously be, even if you buy the notion that the quarterback competition does involve the starting quarterback position, which I don't believe it does. I think there's competition for the backup job between Stidham and Wilson, but there's no competition for the starting job. But even if there were someone other than Nix manning the controls, it would be someone who has never started a game for the Denver Broncos other than the two Stidham started at the end of last year. So you'd still be starting, even if it's Stidham as the starter somehow on opening day, you'd still be starting a different quarterback than the one who started
quarterback
a year ago.
Yeah.
So it's been 11 years running.
Stunning.
And that's a big part of the reason. I'd say 85 to 90% of the reason the Broncos missed the playoffs for 8 straight years is because there's been no stability at head coach, at quarterback, and therefore at a lot of other positions. And we have seen more than a few defensive coordinators and position coaches come through here during that time because they keep changing head coaches, and that encapsulates all that change. You've had Fox, you've had Kubiak, you've had Joseph, you've had Fangio, you've had Hackett, and now you have Peyton. That's 6 different head coaches within that 11-year period.
That's obviously kind of stunning when you break down the idea that it's been not only the different coaches, but the combination. And when you started out saying, look, you think of the Super Bowls that have been won over the last 10 years, basically since the Broncos were back, it's been coach quarterback combinations for the most part, really leading the way. And that's not new. Historically, that's the way it's gone through Super Bowl history. So for the Broncos, that's all the more reason to believe that this is the Bo Nix show, because Sean Payton understands that as well as anyone. He and Drew Brees had a tremendous amount of synergy as well, led to a Super Bowl title for them. So Sean Payton didn't pick Bo Nix just to throw him in the mix with a bunch of guys. He picked him to start him so they could start working together on that kind of offense and the structure, get that sort of mind meld going as best as they can between quarterback and coach the good teams have. That's why Nix is here. So again, there is a quarterback competition, but it's for the backup. That's Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson, and already Jarrett Stidham has a lead. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about starters. And there are a couple other positions in which the starting job is open. And we'll go to the middle of the offensive line first, in which it's center. Sam Mustipher brought in a veteran that's played a little bit with the Ravens. And of the youngsters, Luke Wattenberg, selected a couple years ago in the mid-rounds, and Alex Forsyth, the 7th-round selection out of Oregon. That is probably going to be a genuine competition, although when you have 2 inexperienced guys and a veteran, I generally think the veterans probably got the leg up.
Except one of the inexperienced ones has played with Bo Nix before, and the other 2
even though he'd be the one with
the
lower pick than Wattenberg, not the veteran. Ordinarily, you'd think, well, he's probably maybe the outside looking in, but maybe in this case, but because the whole idea is
with the Broncos, they're never ordinary circumstances.
Well, that's true.
They're all abnormal.
But in this case, it's about this season. Let's be honest, on offense is about getting Bo Nix up to speed and making him as effective as he can, as quickly as he can. As you pointed out, he's 24. This isn't some long-term prospect building thing that you hope in 3 or 4 years he's going to be good. 3 or 4 years, he's going to be closer to 30. The Broncos expect Bo Nix to get better quickly. And to do that, every bit of familiarity, whether it's Troy Franklin, the wide receiver they picked in the 4th, his leading receiver at Oregon, or maybe Forsyth, actually that's a factor now.
I think so. A quarterback has to have a rapport with his center. And the only receiver with whom Nix has any experience is Troy Franklin.
So that one would be a big one, obviously. The Broncos have 4 other returning linemen that have been their starters. And that unit with Lloyd Cushenberry, who has since moved on in free agency, started more snaps in the NFL as a unit than any other offensive line.
And they broke it up.
Sea change from what the Broncos
they made no attempt to keep Cushenberry.
No, they did not.
Which, again, you have a veteran center. You would think you'd want to at least make an offer to keep that veteran center if you're planning on introducing a new quarterback, i.e. Bo Nix. But even in the case of Jarrett Stidham, I can't believe Wilson would ever start unless the other 2 got hurt.
Right.
You'd want an experienced center.
I mean, obviously, we know there's a cap crunch with the most dead cap money a team's ever carried, but
it
is
that.
intriguing.
But that's
and I
part
get
of the problem.
Drawbacks with Cushenberry and strength and size.
I don't know. He's the second best offensive lineman, though, and they just let him go. They didn't even make.
They just let him walk. Yep, and that's something the Broncos have done here.
Maybe he was too close to Russell Wilson.
Russell Wilson did actually call out Cushenberry the very first year he was here about how smart he was as a player. That's not a shock coming out of LSU when he centered for some guy named Joe Burrow. He had the 12, basically the 12th man thing on his shirt. That's where he
was, I believe. Yes, yeah, he was the captain.
He was the team captain. Cushenberry was the captain as center. And so obviously, a thoughtful guy that knows the game. He's moved on. The Broncos, of course, will throw that one up for grabs. The last position is up for grabs too, is tight end. And boy, to talk about the tight end position, especially when you're thinking about the AFC West, you have Travis Kelce in there. Now you have Brock Bowers in there. You look at the teams in the Super Bowl, George Kittle. If you want to get to the Super Bowl of late, having a top tight end is important. Mark Andrews was hurt for a lot of the year. Obviously, a major part of what Baltimore does. Tight ends are a major part of offenses, and the Broncos haven't been able to find one. And I think when you talk to fans right now, I know when I do, the first thing they ask about is Greg Dulcich. I don't think that's the right question to ask anymore, because I don't think Sean Payton, who has invested anything in Greg Dulcich, he didn't pick him. All he's seen is a guy that's battled injuries the majority of the time, as he grabbed a guy he was familiar with, Adam Troutman, and then has worked in Lucas Kroll a little bit more and more.
Lucas Kroll is the one who gets the raves.
Yeah, from Payton.
From Sean Payton.
And Adam Troutman,
he's the only one.
When Payton has brought him in, and they brought him back, they did get a new deal. But the idea was Payton knew what you were getting in Troutman, a veteran guy who can block and can catch here and there, knows the job, knows what he's supposed to do. Kroll seems to be the riser. But when we're talking about Dulcich, I look at Dulcich, and I wonder if he's even going to make the team. I don't think he's in the mix to start at all, unless he has a training camp and a preseason.
What is it about the Broncos historically drafting tight ends who get hurt all the time?
Well, in the Jake Butt case, you knew that was a dart. That was a later round pick. That he would have been a first rounder.
He wasn't a first rounder either.
No,
that was a flyer on a guy who wasn't known for his blocking. I can tell you that.
No,
at UCLA.
The idea was they were looking more for the pass catching deep threat. The guy that can go down the seam. Sort of a poor man's Travis Kelce idea, but certainly doesn't have the full package. And after really a couple of years of being hurt the majority of the time, you do wonder if he's ever going to get there. But to my mind, I look at Dulcich and think that that's one of the guys on this team that there's no reason to talk about him as a player of any import until he forces himself back in the equation. The opportunity to be part of that with Nathaniel Hackett, maybe he was invested in George Payton. Maybe those days would still be here. But with Sean Payton, he has no ties to Dulcich whatsoever. Dulcich has to prove himself from absolute scratch, and probably even from more than that, because to Payton's case, he's probably underwater a bit. He has to get at least healthy and on the field before Payton even considers him an option. I don't think he's even in the mix to start.
I don't either. He may be lucky, as you say, to make the team. There are just too many positions like that on this team where you're choosing in some form or fashion the lesser of evils.
Yeah. And that's what happens when you don't draft well.
Option.
You draft and you take some gambles, and the Broncos have done that with guys that have had injury histories. And when it doesn't pan out, you end up getting nothing. That's always a big time challenge. So those are the three we're looking at. The quarterback competitions we talked about. For starter, that's done. And for all the reasons that Sandy explained, 11 straight seasons with different head coach quarterback combinations. But center, tight end, when training camp reconvenes, those will be front and center when it comes to talking about the Broncos offense. We'll look at the defense in a minute, but want to take a moment as we start having some pretty gorgeous days out here. Talk about a little golf.
Today's certainly one of those days, and it's time to go out and play. If you haven't been playing already, and maybe even if you have, go to the city of Denver. They have the perfect golf pass for you, whether you're just getting started or you've played for years, even decades. The practice and play pass is for those new to the game to practice what they've learned and transition it onto the golf course. The Learn and Play Pass 1.0 is geared toward adult beginners, people who've never held a club, players looking to advance their game, or if you've been playing for a while, you can try the Learn and Play Pass 2.0, which is designed to be flexible for intermediate players looking to improve and fine-tune their game. And if you're just looking to have some fun, bring some friends, some colleagues along with you. The Friends and Family Pass lets you play mini golf or hit the driving range. You can bring up to 3 guests with you every time. With 8 unique courses and opportunities for all skill levels, Denver Golf is the place to be. It's perfect for anyone and everyone. You can learn more about everything Denver Golf has to offer by visiting cityofdenvergolf.com. Come home to play, because Denver Golf is your neighborhood course.
Well, you look at the Broncos on the other side of the ball as we take a look at what post minicamp, what the Broncos in training camp might look like. And there are a couple positions when you look at the starting positions that are up for grabs too. And let's start with maybe the most obvious one. If you had a chance to tune into Colorado Sports Night last night on KWGN Channel 2, I talked about that with Mick Miller and the crew. But the first one is the one that's opposite Pat Surtain. We know that Pat Surtain's going to start. Obviously, you could make the very easy argument probably that he is, with Justin Simmons gone, the best Denver Broncos player, period, end of story. And I'm not sure there's even a discussion. It's Surtain and nobody. And that even includes the fact that you've brought up before last season that Surtain might be maybe even a little bit overrated when it comes to being a complete player. Well, he's the Denver Broncos best.
Listen, he didn't have a great year last year.
No.
And he was better the year before.
I think
and he was better the year before that. And he had some terrific years at Alabama. He's obviously a premier corner. You'd take him, he'd start for any team. Where my issue comes in, yes, there's weakness on the other side. There was last year.
Right.
They found some answers in the slot as the year went on. But as far as outside cornerbacks were concerned, if you combined injuries with poor performance, and again, in the offseason, I continue to make this point, and at the risk of breaking my record for most repeated observations, there is absolutely no reason why it has taken so long for the Denver Broncos to find a suitable cornerbacking partner on the outside for Patrick Surtain, unless you talk about an absence of draft picks, at least an absence of early round draft picks.
Right.
There was some speculation, even this year on the first round, not from us, but from others, that maybe the Broncos wouldn't use the 12th overall pick on Bo Nix. Maybe they take the premier cornerback. Right. And as it turns out, from the way the draft fell, they pretty much could have done that had they wanted to.
Yeah.
And certainly cornerback is a position of need. My guess, and it's only a guess, is that Riley Moss from Iowa, who was injured last year, will be the opening day starter on the outside. I think he's the best player. He's another guy who has earned rave reviews from Sean Payton. And I pay attention to that stuff more than I do all the speculation, including some that I've read about Damari Mathis having this great offseason.
Right.
And boy,
but we haven't heard Sean Payton mention him.
But Sean Payton hasn't talked
He's
about
the guy
him.
that decides who starts and who doesn't. I think you're exactly right. And Sean Payton's also not one of the guys that, as a coach, he doesn't actually, for the most part, is J.J. McCarthy smokescreen, which didn't really fool anybody, at least not the two guys at this desk. It doesn't really play all that coy. He'll tell you flat out, he likes this player, he doesn't like what this player is doing. Ask Russell Wilson. So I think when you do hear him call out a guy like Riley Moss, I do think there's a lot of what he saw that he likes, especially since in Moss's case, they had to wait a little bit for the injuries. But I think in Damari Mathis's case, can he make the team? Quite possibly. They're not that deep a cornerback, and he's young and does have some ability. I think they like Jaquan McMillan, who played a very important role as the year goes along, but seems more like a guy that's a better fit in the slot. And he's probably a slot player, which, by the way, we've talked about before. I consider, and I think you do too at this point, I consider the slot cornerback to be a starting position in the NFL because nickel is the alignment that most defenses are in the NFL, the majority of snaps. So when people talk about base defenses in the NFL, it's the nickel. Every single team this year, all 32, played the majority of their defensive snaps in the nickel. So a slot corner to me is a starter. And right now, that's Jaquan McMillan. But you look at Riley Moss, you look at Chris Abrams-Drain, the rookie that they selected. Moss's health obviously is worth watching, but he had a sports hernia injury. Once those are healed, they're generally, knock on wood, healed. And so if he's feeling better, that can help. But that's one of those positions that's incredibly important. You know who you're facing in this division. You know you have Justin Herbert. You know you have Patrick Mahomes. You know you get each of those guys twice. And if you haven't gone and looked down the AFC quarterback list, it's not easier than it was last year. It's even deeper because of the players that have been drafted or moved to other teams. So obviously for the Broncos, this is a critical position. In fact, I would argue, Sandy, as much as we're talking about other positions, whoever starts opposite of Pat Surtain, that is the story to my mind for the Denver Broncos. If you're to look at camp stories and what position is the one to watch, ignore the quarterbacks. That's Bo Nix's. It's whoever starts opposite of Pat Surtain that I think will make the biggest difference when you're talking about wide open competitions on this team.
I agree. I think it's a critical choice. And, I think the notion that no one would ever throw in the direction of Patrick Surtain was a bit overblown last year, because we did see people occasionally throw at Patrick Surtain with some success in key situations and during the course of ball games. The Miami game we bring up all the time in week 3 of last year, in which the Broncos gave up 70 points and Surtain was on the field for virtually all of that game. And then later in the season, New England Patriots game came down to the wire, and sure enough, after playing for overtime, but seeing that the Broncos were going to allow them to move the ball, they started off by trying to kill the clock and play for overtime, and the Broncos made some passes available, and they said, why not? Ended up kicking the winning field goal, and a key pass play involved a pass being thrown in Patrick Surtain's direction that he was unable to break up. And I think there's a lot said about Surtain's technique, and that's all well and good, but the Broncos need somebody on the outside who can make more plays than their cornerbacks made last year. I think Surtain had 1 interception in 2023.
And at least at this point in his career, as good as he is, he doesn't really appear to be much of a ball hawk. And that's okay. I mean, he's a cornerback. The old joke, of course, and it's not entirely fair, is that if he had great hands, he'd be a wide receiver. But
I don't think he has bad hands.
No, but he's
a technique.
Yes.
His
job
corner.
is the way he approaches it. He is more there to deny the completion than he is to intercept the ball.
Right.
Now, that's not a bad thing, because if you're Sean Payton and you're Vance Joseph, you say, all right, we get that. We might not get as many turnovers, but we're also probably not going to have as many big plays that go over the top because he gambled and was wrong.
Right.
And so there is some dependability to that too, which has its own value. And Surtain is in line for a monumental new contract when his rookie deal obviously changes. In fact, depending on the timing, he may end up with
but this is why
quarterback in history.
I know we're deviating from the conversation here a bit, but that's why a Sauce Gardner, who does seem to be a ball hawk, who does make plays
and gambles,
people don't like to throw at him very often, and yet he makes plays. Now, will he get burned more than Patrick Surtain gets burned? Yeah, but everybody gets burned now in the NFL. Everybody gives up yards. Everybody gives up points. What you have to have is takeaways. And that is something that historically, since Orange Crush, has been something that's come and gone for the Broncos defensively. They've had some teams that did give up a lot of yards and even a lot of points, but did take the ball away. Perhaps in the middle of Mike Shanahan's 14-year reign as head coach, they had a little bit of that, and you'd prefer to have the takeaways, certainly in this day and age, as opposed to a shutdown defense or a shutdown corner, when there really aren't any such things anymore as shutdown corners and shutdown defenses that take everything away Sunday in and Sunday out.
Even conceptually, defenses in the NFL aren't really designed that way anymore. There's the understanding that you won't be able to stop yards, and to a certain extent, you won't even be able to stop points. A lot of defenses, we've talked with Brian Billick about that, who knows a little bit about defense and winning Super Bowls, where he said that today's defenses are about taking the ball away. You know, it's a Wade Phillips special. It's perfect. Go see ball, go get ball. And that's really the difference, because there's only so much you can do to stop a lot of these NFL offenses, the ones that are good. There's only so much you can do to limit them. The turnovers are the things that change the game, that tip them, even if they're not pick six, even if they're not scoop or score. Having that kind of an extra possession or a possession on the other side of the field, that's what really flips games. And I think when you hear the comparisons, and I get why they're there, because he's the last great one. You hear Pat Surtain and Champ Bailey, what the difference is. The difference is Champ Bailey's interception numbers are extraordinary for a guy that didn't get thrown at. And he didn't get thrown at in part, same as Sauce Gardner, because you're concerned about him taking it the other way. And when you're not concerned about that, about Surtain, it doesn't mean that Surtain isn't an all-pro caliber cornerback. He is. But that's why he gets thrown at, because teams realize there's not the risk of the game getting broken apart. There's the chance that we won't complete it on Surtain, but our guy might catch it and Surtain's going to immediately tackle him. Okay, we can live with that. But we're not worried about Surtain jumping that, taking it to the house like you were with Champ Bailey. So Champ Bailey, you didn't throw over there, not just because he blanketed guys, he did, but because you were worried he might even score on you. The Sauce Gardners of the world, the cornerbacks that flip the game by being ball hawks, even though every once in a while they get burned. Those are the guys quarterbacks are afraid of.
When you talk about the reason that the Broncos had so much success relative to the competition against Brady and Belichick.
Mm-hmm.
Beat him out of a couple of championship games, right? In 13 and 15. And had some success in the regular season, particularly when Mike Shanahan was the head coach. And also became the first team in the postseason to beat Brady and Belichick as a tandem.
Right.
Speaking of quarterback coaching tandems, it might have been the greatest of all time, right? But the reason was that they got in Brady's face.
Yep.
They forced Brady into turnovers. And Brady, more than any other quarterback throughout his career, avoided turnovers. Even when he first got into the lineup, he had a long string of passes thrown without any being picked off. And in 2001, the Patriots come into Denver, and they're struggling a little bit. Brady is just settling in, but he hasn't thrown any picks yet. And the Broncos picked him off, I think, 3 times in the fourth quarter of that game and went on to win it here in Denver. And that pattern continued throughout a great many games that the Broncos played against the Patriots.
Brady in his first game against the Broncos in the regular season, 2001, threw 2 touchdowns and 4 picks. He only threw 6.
I can't remember if 3 or all 4 came in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, but he threw only 6 picks in the 14 career games regular season against the Broncos. 4 in the very first game he played.
Right.
In the playoffs.
But they got in his face.
Right.
And in the playoffs, they not only got in his face, they forced him into some mistakes.
14 games as a regular season matchup. Brady threw 29 touchdowns to 6 picks. In the playoffs, 9-5. And that includes that 2011 game, which we know went sideways, in which Brady had 6 of those 9 touchdowns. Take that game away, and Brady in his playoff career against the Broncos threw 3 touchdowns to 4 picks.
Right.
That's what changes it.
And in
Even
the
against the best
game, we remember that with, Tim Tebow game following the
fractured rib and
11 season. And,
right.
Tebow got beaten up and the Broncos got killed.
Right.
In that game. It was,
you don't throw it out. It happened.
You could, I'd almost say you could have changed the quarterbacks and the outcome would have been the same. You could have Tebow playing for New England, and New England still would have won. That's how vastly superior the Patriots were on that occasion. But then it started kind of an every other year matchup in 13 and 15 between the Broncos and the Patriots, and the games that were played here in Denver for the championship following the 2013 and 15 seasons. Denver won, and Brady was at best substandard.
For this position opposite Surtain, we'll watch it as it comes along. We get to training camp. We said it's one of the big ones, but one of the things that's fascinating about it is because Surtain isn't a ball hawk, because this is why quarterbacks stay away from certain corners. The cornerback who I think does the best job threatening and becoming an interception threat during these training camp practices, during the joint practices with the Packers, during the preseason. That player probably has the inside track, someone who could at least make a quarterback pause and say, this guy might pick me off. That's probably the guy.
And a guy who actually
does the job.
Actually does it in these intra-squad scrimmages or in the exhibition.
And that, I think, is an open question. And maybe Riley Moss gets the
maybe
first
Riley
crack
Moss
at it,
is that guy.
but we'll find out as it comes along. Of course, congratulations are due to one of Colorado's own winning an NBA title, but we'll get to that in a moment. Want to remind you that if you are selling your home in Colorado, obviously you're in a pretty good spot because people want to move here, and it's going to probably turn out pretty well for you. Of course, unless you're trying to move somewhere else in Colorado, but that's a different discussion. Either way, I've got the people you need to talk to. Dave and Mark at the Key Real Estate Group's Colorado Luxury Home Team. You've heard me talk about them before. When I say Colorado's luxury home team, that's the service, not the home. Whether you're selling your condo, whether you're selling your home, everything in between, you get the same service from Dave and Mark and the Key Real Estate Group, that luxury service, the hands-on service that you get from them. That's because they're privately owned, and they've been in the same offices for more than 25 years. You're not dealing with some big company and whatever agent you get assigned. You're dealing with Dave and Mark. It's their company. It's their show. They've been at it for as long as they have because they know how to navigate the highs and the lows. They've been here and they've seen it all, and that makes them the best fit for you. That's why we can say they're the Colorado luxury home team, because it's a service you get that you can only get from people with that level of experience and that level of control that comes from owning your own place. So inventory is still low around the Denver metro area. Homes that are priced right still sell very, very quickly. And oftentimes they can even sell above the list, although that's, it depends on the situation. And that's why listing it at the right number is so incredibly important. And that's why you want to call Dave and Mark and let them give you a free valuation. So you make sure that the most valuable asset you're going to own, your home, is priced right so you can get the most out of it when you choose to sell it. Spring is here for a couple more days. Summer comes this week, and with summer comes a whole bunch of new home shoppers and new home buyers. So you want to get yours out in the market at the right price so it can move quickly for you. Folks are already looking, and they're only going to be out there more and more in force as the weather gets warmer. So there's no reason to wait. Let Dave and Mark represent you to make sure that you're getting everything you deserve. They're easy to get a hold of. Here's how. Call them today at the Key Real Estate Group, 720-900-LIST. That's 720-900-LIST, or visit them today. Get a hold of Dave and Mark at keyrrealestategroup.com. Congratulations go to the Boston Celtics, passing the Lakers, now their 18th championship, breaking that tie. So Boston wins that championship last night by benefit of their one-sided romp over the Dallas Mavericks, 106-88. Boston almost looked as if, okay, Dallas, you had your fun in that last game. We kind of gave up about 5 minutes in. This one, we're serious, and off they go. But Derek White, former legend high school product, former University of Colorado, Buffalo, as well as a couple other spots on the way, ends up winning a championship again, like he has over the course of his career, being maybe the unsung hero of one of those teams that he has been on. 38 minutes, 14 points, 8 boards, four of them on the offensive variety, couple of steals, a block, doing what he does. And in one of the highlight reel moments, you have the bloody sock for the Red Sox and Kurt Schilling that's in lore, right? Well, Derek White dives for a loose ball, gets landed on, chips the front tooth, goes on and gets the title.
Loosens a few more.
But that smile with about half that front tooth missing immediately goes into Boston lore. And after the game, obviously, when he was asked about it, you could tell that Derek White maybe even knew it.
Smile for us. Let's see that pretty smile. You got some loose teeth, you got a chip tooth. This cost you. Why was it all worth it?
Man, this is what we work for. I mean, I'll lose all my teeth for a championship, and so I'll get it fixed, and I'm going to enjoy this one.
Yes, the team dentist will be hard at work today on Derek White, but
I don't know, I might want to leave. If it's not too sore, I might want to leave it for a little bit. Flex a little bit with that there.
The play of the game for Derek White, in my mind, And I wonder if it's the same play in your mind as well. The block shot.
Yeah.
Let's play the game.
Absolutely.
I don't care about any of the other numbers. He blocked Derek Lively's shot. Now, I know Derek White has more block shots than any other guard in basketball, and that's been true well beyond just this particular season that we're talking about right now. But you're not blocking another guard shot. You're blocking a setter who explodes to the rim, and you go right up there with him, and instead of stuffing you along with the basketball through the rim, the shot gets blocked. And I think that summed up the series. That was the series in microcosm right there.
Yeah.
That Boston had a 6'4" guy blocking an explosive leaper's dunk attempt.
And a guy
right
who was
at the
absolutely
rim. And did
critical.
not foul him.
No.
Did not foul him as most guards would have done. They'd have cut across his arms and fouled him.
Lively
and sent him to the line because Lively doesn't shoot fouls well. No, he took away the shot. He blocked the shot and sent the Celtics going the other way. And, of course, the play on which he got landed on, that was Derek Lively, too, landing on him and basically face planting him into the parquet hardwood of TD Bank Arena in Boston.
And keep in mind that this is the guy in Lively who in the last two games, in the win, had 11 points and 12 boards. In the game 3 loss, 11 points and 13 boards. Lively been a major cog in whatever Dallas was doing. And then last night finishes with 4 boards in 24 minutes, even more the other, and 5 personal fouls. I think White got him off his game. I think it sent a message to Boston that we're not going to lose tonight, and you could kind of feel it emanate through the rest of it. And
it was over the end of the first quarter when Boston went on that run, 28-18 at the quarter. The competitive portion of the game
Dallas had really run out of gas.
Pretty much ended. I know they cut it to single digits here and there in the second quarter, but Boston pulled away again. That miracle midcourt shot, which Peyton Pritchard seems to specialize in, the Oregon Duck. Who plays
one shot, one
minute,
3-point attempt, 1 minute,
and makes that 3-pointer from midcourt or a little beyond midcourt, maybe to finish off.
And Porzingis gets to at least play a handful of minutes.
He played a handful of minutes,
enjoy
and he didn't look terribly comfortable, but he was out there, and he got through the game without any further damage being done, apparently. But you look at Boston's team. They have figured out 5-out basketball.
And figured
out 5-out basketball.
Boy, Boston was intent on putting this away last night. 45 minutes for Tatum, 44 for Brown, 43 for Holiday, 38 for White. Right. They weren't going to go to Game 6.
Well, they were never going to go to Game 6.
They were making sure.
You know what happened?
They were going to finish this.
They would have, I think, come out of that game last night in single season consideration for one of the 2 or 3 best single season teams. I'm not talking about dynasty runs like the 90s Bulls. I'm talking about for a single season. They would have come out, if not for that 38-point loss in Game 4, they would have come out statistically, when you talk about one lost record, point differential, which by the end of the playoffs is only 8 because they lost that one game the other night by 38 down in Dallas. It would have been 10, almost 11 had they not lost so badly. They could have lost the game by 8-10 points and still had an average point differential in the playoffs of more than 10 points. Believe it or not, there aren't that many teams who have beaten the opposition by 11 points per game, let's say, during the regular season, and almost as badly beaten teams in the playoffs. And I know one of the knocks against this Boston team is going to be, well, they didn't play any team that was, 1, all that good, and 2, completely healthy. Even Dallas, Doncic was clearly playing injured. And obviously in the East, you weren't dealing with great teams to begin with. And in every series, some key guy seemed to be missing from action. But let's remember, the Celtics themselves played 12 of 19 playoff games without Porzingis.
Mm-hmm.
Denver Nuggets never had to do that last year. And the Nuggets were the best team and the deserving champions. But if you're looking at a team, and we've talked this through before on this program, if you're looking for a team that might have a chance in a year or two, depending on whether they can tack another championship onto what they've already accomplished, they might go in there with teams like the Bulls of the 90s, not in terms of the length of dynasty, the breadth of the dynasty, but in terms of quality for the modern game. You think of the Bulls, you think of those Warrior teams, particularly when Durant joined them. You think of the 86 Celtics. You think of the Lakers the following year in 87. You think of the Shaq Kobe Lakers, who in the early 2000s won 3 straight championships. That's the kind of tier that Boston might end up getting into. For now, I think Boston belongs on that second tier of champions going back to the merger in the mid-'70s, along with the 2014 San Antonio Spurs, the 13 Heat, which is probably the best of the Heatles teams, and the 83 76ers, only lost 1 game in the entire playoffs. The 89 Pistons, the first of the 2 Detroit championship teams. The 99 Spurs, who, of course, played in a season that was shortened, a great team that would have won over a full season more than 60 games, and maybe the first Warriors championship team in 2015 with Curry and Thompson and Draymond Green and Iguodala and all the rest.
The reason that it might not, and there's a parallel that I think is interesting because, yeah, you look at Boston, of course, they'll be the favorites to repeat, just as the Nuggets were originally after they won. But there are some similarities because I think a lot of people made the mistake of thinking the Nuggets championship window burst open when they won the championship. That's not true. Their window was open prior to that, but injuries to Jamal Murray and to a lesser extent Michael Porter Jr. Kept it from getting closer than it did. When they hit that championship, then the bill came due and it became very difficult. Well, for Boston, it's the same thing. Jaylen Brown's rookie extension that he signed in a previous version of the CBA now jumps, and his new deal essentially doubles. So Jaylen Brown will make about $49.4 million next year, as opposed to 26. Jason Tatum will make 34.8. Drew Holiday already makes 30. Kristaps Porzingis makes 29.3. Derek White even makes 20 plus. That puts Boston in the second apron as it stands right now with 3 other teams: the Nuggets, the Timberwolves, and the Suns. The latter 2 put all of their eggs in one basket to try to win right now, and neither of them came away with it. But both of those teams now join the Nuggets and the Celtics, the last 2 champs, with major cap implications that make things difficult. As it stands, neither the Nuggets nor the Celtics can use the mid-level exception. They can't aggregate player salaries in a trade. They can't send out cash in a trade. You can't acquire a player using a trade exception. All you can do is re-sign your own players, draft picks, and sign players to minimum contracts.
They don't need to. All their guys are under contract for another year or 2. They're going to have at least 1 or 2 more years, before they have to consider, all right, we may have to let somebody go, somebody of consequence. But the reason that they made
an
those
injury
moves,
to Porzingis, though, can throw all of that into a
injury to any of these.
Well, but Porzingis's injury,
but they won a championship without him.
They did.
They won a championship without him. 12 out of 19 games. Come on. I don't want to hear about all the injuries that other teams had when the Celtics were missing their starting center, who's a terrific player, for 12 of the 19 playoff games. I don't want to hear it. The Nuggets didn't have to go through that last year. The Warriors didn't have to go through that in 22. We talk about the 6 straight champions. You know what had a lot to do with that? COVID did. Because they played 3 postseasons in 22 months, from June of 2020 August of 2020 to June of 2022. They played 3 full postseasons in that period. That's why they weren't repeat champions. That's why they weren't. The team that
it was
won a
a weird
championship
situation,
had
sure.
basically no off season. The Celtics have a full off season. The biggest concern the Celtics have in the off season, if it's a concern at all, and I don't think it's much of one, is that a bunch of their players will be playing in the Olympics.
Yeah, and they'll have to get extensions done for Jason Tatum and
they'll get that done though, and they're all set for next year and basically for the following year too. And that's it. You talk about, you're exactly right about windows, but they've had 6 Eastern Conference Finals appearances.
But that tells me that their window is closer to the end than the beginning.
I understand, but how long do you want the window to be open?
Oh, no, it's been impressive.
12 years?
Certainly.
15 years?
No.
I mean, in this
it's
day
been
and
impressive.
age, that's impossible. But they'll have a window of a decade in which they got to the Eastern Conference Finals 6 out of 8 years as of now, 2 NBA Finals in 3 years, and they won the second one.
Mm-hmm.
And, 7th year of Brown and Tatum together. Well, how long did it take a Michael Jordan and the Bulls to win?
Right. I get all that. I just think if you're the Nuggets and you're wondering how you bounce back, it's because the salary cap constraints are real, and they will make the things even more difficult for the Denver Nuggets, but they will make things difficult for the Celtics as well. What they've got is what they've got. Injuries derail it, just like they can derail it for any of the top teams. But it will be fascinating to see. Congratulations to the Celtics. Obviously kind of cruise through the regular season, and they walk away with their 18th championship, and especially congratulations to Derek White of Colorado, the cover athlete of our Preps issue last year. Maybe seeing some great things in his future. Not as many great things are in the future for the Colorado Rockies, because not that many great things have been in the present for the Colorado Rockies, how quickly things can change. But we'll get to them in a minute. Want to remind you, now that there is warmer weather outside, you're maybe thinking of spending those evenings on the patio, in the backyard, either with your family or your friends, or maybe on the weekend having a big event. Well, any of those options are great opportunities to talk to our friends at Rolling Smoke Barbecue and make your dinner very, very easy. Sure, you want to entertain everyone at the house, but sometimes you need a break from the kitchen. That's what Rolling Smoke does best. Whether you have a half dozen folks, just the family, or even throwing those big weekend parties of 50 or more, you can pick out the best barbecue in town from one of Rolling Smoke's 4 locations. You can find them in Aurora, inside the Stanley Marketplace. That's the one that started it all. In Golden, inside the Golden Mill, at the corner of Dry Creek and University at Centennial. Pretty close to the Mile High Sports offices, where I go and grab the honey bourbon sausage. Is delicious. You know about, of course, all the burnt ends. You know about the turkey. You know about all the other things you can expect at a great barbecue joint. And they're all there at Rolling Smoke, but there's some original things that you should give a try to as well. And now the newest location is open on 38th in Wheat Ridge. And if you're at a show at Red Rocks this summer, and you're thinking about maybe getting something else for a snack, don't get like the hot dogs like you get everywhere else, or a hamburger. Go ahead and get some barbecue. Get some top tier barbecue. You can get Rolling Smoke right up there as well. And then when you get that and your friends, you'll start craving it a little bit more, and you can grab it at any one of those other locations as well. It's Rolling Smoke Barbecue. Find them online, and you can order there as well at RollingSmokeBBQ.com. Standy, with the Dodgers coming into town for a 4-game set down at Coors Field, the Rockies dropped the first one. Not a surprise. The Dodgers, obviously one of the best teams in baseball. Dodgers win that 9-5. But what shocks me is that the Rockies, we talk about what the problem is. There's many problems, but how's this? Last night, Bud Black started 4 players. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's only a certain amount in the lineup that had a batting average of under the Mendoza line of 200. I don't know at what certain point you're thinking, how'd they get 5? Nolan Jones, granted back from injury, hitting 198 on the year. He went 1 for 4 to get to 198. His average actually went up.
Well, sure.
Michael Tolia, also his average went up 1 for 4, got him up to 188. Hunter Goodman, the DH, you might not know who that is. That's kind of the point. He went 1 for 4 to up his average to 195. Alan Trejo, unfortunately, starting at third, he dropped 0 for 4, brings him down to 135. Of course, I'm not even counting Adael Amador, so it's really 5,
really
but I'm not really blaming a guy who's only had a handful of at-bats to who's batting 103.
But he over an extended period of time, he's not going to hit.
And Alaris Montero's just above it at 203, and he went 1 for 3 to sneak above it. I mean, this team doesn't hit, Sandy.
No. And, they scored some runs late. The game was not as close as the final score might indicate.
Yeah, it was 9-1 going into the bottom of the 9th.
But, again, when you think about what they might do to resolve that. Dick Mofford, Bill Schmidt, the general manager, going to look at that, and they're going to say, you mean we have to trade Diaz and or McMahon at the deadline? Well, we can't. That's a good portion of our offense. They're two of the 3 or 4 legitimate hitters we've got on the roster. We can't do that. And I read about a deal that the Athletic suggested they make involving Ryan McMahon going to Seattle, and Seattle could use some.
Well, a lot of teams could use
slugging, but Seattle especially as a first place team, they're 25th in baseball in OPS. 25th out of 30 teams, and they're still in first place because the division stinks. They're still in first place by 9 games. And they would I think they would gladly trade for Ryan McMahon, but the Athletic had the Rockies getting back a young pitcher who's worked more in the minors than he has in the majors and certainly been more effective in the minors, but he's a middle of the rotation guy, potentially, in Emerson Hancock, a right-hander, and an infielder named Michael Arroyo, who's 19 years old and is playing low A ball right now, but seems to have some power, a little bit of speed. And I'm saying the Rockies would never make that trade.
No.
I think there's an argument to be made in favor of it, but the Rockies would never do it. And the justification would be that McMahon is too popular. And secondarily, well, we're having trouble scoring runs now. We trade Ryan McMahon, and especially if Diaz gets dealt, let's say, to the Cubs, which is a popular rumored destination for Elias Diaz. They're talking about, at that point, they're talking about dealing 2 of the 4 or 5 guys who are legitimate hitters on their roster at the moment.
But at the same time, you have to zoom out, and this is what we'll do, not the Rockies.
Yes,
but
the Rockies will never
zoom out and say, okay, hypothetically, Diaz and McMahon were playing last night. Would you have won that game?
No,
probably not.
Of course not. Of course not. Now, are the Rockies willing to make trades that other teams, and I understand that the White Sox will do a fire sale. Anybody who
you want anybody
got any quality at all, they're going to be looking to move because they're talking about a massive rebuild. The Rockies never quite talk in those terms, but the effect of what they do is that they are constant state of inaction. They're not all in. We talked about the Celtics being all in on a style of play.
They're halfway in.
The Rockies are never all the way in on an approach to
pick a lane,
a winning baseball team. They're never all in. And as a result, the Rockies have played 18 other Major League Baseball teams this year. You know how many they've outscored and at the same time beaten more often than not of those 18? 2. Now, they've actually outscored 4 of the teams, including Pittsburgh, against whom they are 2-4, including Toronto, against whom they are 1-2. They actually outscored Toronto in that 3-game series, 15-14. They actually have outscored Pittsburgh in 6 games this year, though they're only 2-4, 26-25. Really how bad that is. And here's the kicker. Against winning teams, the Rockies this year are 9-14. May not seem great. 391 winning percentage.
Right.
Against losing teams, they aren't even winning a third of their games.
That's shocking.
That's just inexcusable. It is 16-33. That's a winning percentage of 327. Now, you may look at 9-14 and say that's not very good. And yet, this Rockies team has been right around 500 for about 2.5 months now.
Yeah.
Almost now, 2.5 months.
To be fair, they've now lost 12 of their last 16.
True. They've had a terrible month of June.
Wheels are coming off.
And they did have a winning month of May. So, yes, they are, as they say, trending down.
Yeah.
But if they were just 6, 7 games below 500. Let's say instead of 25-47, they were 31-41. They'd be 4.5 games out of the
Let me
final
tell you how the
wild card
Rockies
spot.
think. Boy, if Kyle Freeland hadn't got hurt and we had Nolan Jones
exactly
the
how
whole
they
year,
think.
and if Chris
Exactly how
Bryant
they
would be
think.
better,
Right.
that's where we'd
It's
be.
exactly how they think.
And when you look over something like wins above replacement, which is it's not a be all end all metric, but it has value. But this is where you get an idea where the Rockies are so short sighted. Last year, Ryan McMahon had a 2.9 wins above replacement, and Elias Diaz had a 1.4. So quick math there, that's 4.3, right?
Yeah.
Now the Rockies last year lost more than 100 games. So let's say you give that up for average players, and now you win 4 fewer games. Are the Rockies any closer to anything of value? No. Are those two guys having better years this year? Yeah, they are. Not night and day, though. We're 70 games in. McMahon is at a 1.8, and Diaz is at a 1.5. So Diaz is having a much better season. Let's say even hypothetically, they carry this all the way through. And Diaz ends with a 3, and McMahon ends, let's say, he goes with a 4. And you replace them with average players. So the Rockies will, in theory, be 7 games worse. Now, that's a big difference for 2 guys over 162. I get that. But at the same time, they're still going to lose at minimum 90. If this trend continues, they're still going to be challenging 100 plus. So you're still a last place team. So why are you not building towards something? You brought up Emerson Hancock at one point, a high draft pick. If I remember correctly.
Sure.
And you never know. Some guys, they rebound the next time. Arroyo, I'm familiar with Arroyo. He played on the Puerto Rican national team.
Yeah.
He's only 19. He's got 11 home runs in AAA already. Okay. You're telling me you couldn't get at least a middle of a rotation starter, and for the Rockies, maybe even a near top of the rotation starter, and a promising youngster who is clearly has already outgrown single A and is about ready to jump up again. For players that in a year or two won't be able to help you. Diaz is a free agent. This is where the Rockies end up being short-sighted. Okay, yeah, you look at it and say, we'd be 7 games worse at the end of the year without Ryan McMahon and Elias Diaz. Okay, but when you lose 97 to 106 games, what does it matter? You've got to build the whole team up and not hold on to older, more expensive guys.
Right.
This is the kind of thing they just can't seem to wrap their head around. We'll see what the Rockies do. And maybe if this June swoon continues, as disastrous as it has been, you can't go on with a 250 winning percentage for terribly long, obviously. Maybe that makes them more aggressive. Tonight, Walker Buehler takes on Austin Gomber down at Coors Field. Both pitchers, 1-4, and Buehler with the 4.64 ERA, the worst of the two. Though don't make the mistake of thinking that Buehler is the worst pitcher or the Dodgers or the worst team. We'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow, obviously. But, you have to evaluate when you look at these long seasons and when you look at the idea of trades. A lot of this is understanding the way to get out of your emotions, to zoom out a little bit and say, hey, get away from that. Let's focus on what actually matters. And on Wednesdays, you have the opportunity to do exactly that at Miley Sports.
Who needs Dr. Rick Perea more, in your opinion? Players whom he helped right before they made a run to the playoffs in 2017 and 2018, right? Or the front office ownership? At this point, I think the guys upstairs need the help a little bit more. But we get our help here, yes, every Wednesday afternoon on Mile High Sports Radio at 5:30. It's Dr. Rick Perea with Wellness Wednesday, our weekly checkup from the neck out from the premier sports psychologist, performance psychologist, more precisely, who's worked with the world champion Denver Broncos as their lead psychologist back in 2015, their championship season with the Rockies, as mentioned. He also worked with the Denver Nuggets during the developing years of Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. He has helped middle and high school performers for years. He speaks on a regular basis in front of corporate audiences, no matter who you are, no matter what your station in life, no matter what your age is. Dr. Rick Perea can help you at 720-287-0933. That's 720-287-0933, or look him up at Dr. P at think14u.org. That's think1 number 4u.org.
Well, let's turn our attention to the NHL, where the Stanley Cup Final is ongoing as we speak. And much like we saw in the NBA Finals, the team that was down 3-0 punched back and avoided the sweep, but now you try to avoid the dreaded gentleman's sweep, if you will. The Oilers will try to do that tonight. The game starts at 6 p.m. They go back to Florida, where they take on the Panthers. And I guess the first question is, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. You thought Dallas was done and the Celtics were last night. And I felt similarly, but I thought that at least for Dallas, they'd maybe believe they had a puncher's chance. The Oilers, though, I think have to believe they have a little better chance than that because they have the best player on the planet.
Yes. And, I know hockey is a little bit different in the sense that even a player like Connor McDavid probably won't play as much as half the game. It's a little bit different. And a great player by himself can't carry a team. He needs help. Now, they got plenty of help in winning 8-1 the other day, right? Mm-hmm. Against Florida.
Sure.
They had goal scoring early and often from people not named Connor McDavid, although he finished the game with 4 points,
3 of those assists,
and 3 assists. But they did have 8 goals in the game, so they still would have won handily had McDavid continued to be kept in check by the Florida forwards and defenseman and goaltender Bobrovsky, who is not at his best. They threw in a stinker, but I agree with you. If you get McDavid going, even on the road, he could be a handful. And I don't think Florida goes into this game thinking, hey, unless we score 4 goals, we can't win.
Right.
But it's possible they might have to get at least 3.
Mm-hmm.
That beating Edmonton 1-0, 2-1 tonight,
that might be tough.
I don't know. I think that might be a difficult chore, and they're going to have to get on the board early.
Mm-hmm.
They've been excellent throughout the series. Even the other night, losing 8-1, they were good on the penalty kill.
And I think
that's one thing they can hang their hat on.
They're good at that because that's a good way to get buried by the Oilers too. When the Oilers have the power play,
Oilers have a great power play,
a huge amount of trouble. But
had a great power play for many years.
But I think that the point you made about Florida scoring first is interesting because I do think that's a big part of it. I think you've put the pressure on that. We've seen that not only in the playoffs, but in the regular season, Edmonton can play a little tight when they're playing from behind. They definitely like getting ahead. They like playing free and loose like that. And there's a risk there. I think if you're Florida, you're still coming in here feeling pretty good, and you should, because you've done a great job on the penalty kill. You're a team that can roll multiple lines. You score plenty for the most part. It's not like a team that doesn't score. But the challenge there is making sure that, especially in the early going, McDavid and company don't have a chance to really get going, because that's the biggest risk and the biggest concern. And I could see that happening tonight. I really could. I think the Oilers shook something loose. And I don't know if it was in game plan. I don't know if it was just getting used to the opponent. I don't know if it was mental. I don't know if it was luck. But they looked like a team that got a lot of the weight off of their shoulders in that last win, even though it was only 1 win. And even though they're still down 3-1, they were skating in a way that I recognized when you saw Edmonton rip off big, long runs of wins at multiple points during this season.
Well, they've been a pretty good team on the road in the playoffs until this series.
And as we know, at least
in the first 2
game
games.
7's notwithstanding, being on the road in the NHL doesn't make much difference.
It doesn't. I think game 7, as we discussed yesterday with Milan Hajduk, game 7 at home can mean quite a bit.
Yeah.
I'd pick Edmonton to win this series if it were 2-2 and not 3-1. If they had won game 4 the other night in the way they did to even the series, even going back to sunrise, I'd give Edmonton the edge. It is still 3-1, and the crowd, I think, will do a lot for Florida. I don't think it will depress Edmonton particularly, but I think it will help Florida. And, Florida played about the way the Celtics played the other night after kind of a difficult game 3 that they managed to win. They relaxed in game 4, and Edmonton came out and said, we're not going to get embarrassed and have the season end in our own arena. It's not going to happen that way. But though it's rare, coming back from 3-0 down in the Stanley Cup Final did happen.
Yeah.
About 85 years ago.
85 years ago.
Still, and it's
like
a little different from that. It was, I think, 42 or 43 when Toronto and Detroit were playing. And I think it was Detroit that got ahead 3-0 and Toronto came back. But I think it's more doable in hockey than it is in professional basketball because the home court means more than the home ice, especially nowadays. All the rinks are standard 200 by 85.
Right.
They're all the same. Back in the
matter.
day, yes, places like Boston and Buffalo had different dimensions. There were smaller ice surfaces.
Ever so slightly. Yep.
So it did make a difference. You were playing on a different ice surface from time to time in the playoffs when those two teams are going well, as they were way back in the 70s. Boston's still good now, but Boston's not playing in the old Boston Garden anymore. They're playing on a 200 by 85 rink. So I think it's Florida's time. I don't know if Edmonton will have a chance as good as this. So I'm kind of fascinated by what might happen tonight. I think it's much more unpredictable than the game last night was. I think that the game last night was fated to go the way it did. I'm not so sure about tonight. I mean, there could be some wild cards, and Connor McDavid is certainly a good enough player. And I guess with Dallas, you could say Doncic might have been the best player on the floor. But during this series, I think the combination that the Celtics as a team defensively are better than anybody else and better equipped to switch off and play different guys on Doncic and make his reads harder. Florida can certainly do that with McDavid, and they do have last change at home. That's the one thing that home ice advantage gives you is last change. But McDavid can get around that. And if you get McDavid going and Hyman going and Draisaitl going and maybe Nugent Hopkins going, then you've still got enough. I think the big difference with Edmonton is that they don't have Kane. And I think especially on the road, they will miss Kane more than they missed him in Edmonton.
If Florida were to wrap it up tonight, who do you think walks away with the Conn Smythe Trophy, or do you think even tonight's game matters?
I think I'd say Bobrovsky, but it could be
Barkov. I look at Barkov as well,
and it could be the defenseman too. Either one of them on the top pair.
So that's still up in the air.
Yes, I think if it was a forward, if it turns out to be a forward, probably be Barkov. But I'd say right now, he was pulled the other night. I know.
Yeah,
that might downgrade him some. But Bobrovsky, other than the game the other night, which to me was an aberration, he's been the Conn Smythe leader throughout the playoffs, and I think if Florida wraps it up tonight, he'll get it.
Well, obviously, it's an interesting setup because we talked about the challenge for the Colorado Avalanche, who are trying to get back. They have the 9th highest cap number in the NHL, about 9.3 million remaining on there. And the idea of trying to get back to where they want to get, that may end up being pretty tricky because when you look at what a Florida team has done, and you look at the depth, we know about the depth that they have. Where are the Avs really lacking? Because I guess I look at their defensive pairings and say, okay, they're not any further off than Florida there. I don't think. I think that Colorado has a very solid defense. I think that there is enough in the goaltending. It's maybe not quite Bobrovsky, but I don't think that Georgiev at his best and what we saw in the postseason was significantly different. Oddly, when you look at the Florida Panthers and the Colorado Avalanche, the difference is in the forwards, and it's not even necessarily in the offensive impact of the forwards. That, I think, makes for an interesting offseason for Colorado, trying to figure out how to make up the gap, not only, of course, in its own division, which it didn't win, but its conference, which it didn't win, and then trying to get back to a cup final while their star players are still in their prime.
Yeah, and I mean, the two huge question marks looming over this team are going to be throughout the offseason, Landeskog and Nichushkin. I am confident that the Avalanche don't know any more about Nichushkin than the rest of us do. I think, though, they know more about Landeskog than the rest of us do. Do they know a lot more about it? No, not a lot more. But do they have information on Landeskog? Do they have kind of a target date for him? I think they have more of a target date. I was a little confused this year when they suggested, and this is Jared Bednar late in the season, that, well, yeah, there's kind of a time during the playoffs, not early on, but perhaps in late May or early June, where we could conceive of the possibility of having him back. I don't know why that was stated in the way it was, because it became pretty obvious early on in the playoffs from the way he was just skating, not close to being able to return to the practice rink. And there would have to be some kind of runway. I mean, it couldn't just say all of a sudden, well, after a day or two of practice, he's ready to go.
Right.
He missed 2 full years. So I never thought that was plausible. But I do think, even though Landeskog said at the press conference, maybe with tongue in cheek, my target is sometime between September and April.
Right.
I think he and the Avalanche have a little more information than the rest of us do. And I think it'll be closer to September than it is to April. And I think they know pretty much exactly when he should be ready. Now, he's missed 2 full years, and they're certainly not going to take any chances. Could there be setbacks? Yes, it's a unique kind of injury situation, to be sure. But I think they have a little more information on that. And as they say, information is power. And I think they at least have a sense of what their lineup might look like. Maybe not in October, maybe not even in November, but before midseason, I think they have an idea that Landeskog will be able to give it a go. And, it reminds me a little bit of where Peter Forsberg was late in his career. Remember when the Avalanche brought him back?
Yeah.
And they won a rounder in the playoffs. He was terrific. He helped them make the playoffs at the end of the regular season. This was in 07-08. Joel Quenneville's last year as a head coach. And then he gets hurt on the practice rink, the morning skate before game 1 of a second-round series against Detroit, a series that a lot of people had the Avalanche perhaps winning with Forsberg in the lineup. And then a few years later, he came back, and that didn't even last more than, 1 game before I just can't go. He had the bad feet.
A lot of questions, big questions for the Avalanche in the offseason. Of course, the offseason doesn't arrive until one of these two teams wins the Stanley Cup. We'll find out more about that tonight. But for the first time back in Denver in 2 years, LFA brings the middleweight championship to the Mile High City at LFA 186. That would be this Saturday, June 22nd. The main event champion, Azamat Bekayev of Russia, defends the middleweight belt against top-ranked contender Chauncey Foxworth. Bekayev, the tough Russian wrestler, is on a battle against Foxworth, who's 6-fight win streak, 28 fights under his belt. That's the main event. And then there's a co-main event as well. There's a women's flyweight bout. Russia's Veronika Borisova versus Nera Rep from Bosnia. Borisova's undefeated and the European champion, but all of Rep's victories she's won by the finish. So LFA is the top development league in the sport, sent over 300 of its athletes over the years to the UFC, and to the point where nearly 1/3 of the UFC's current roster are actually LFA alums. So this event's going to be very, very interesting. Find it on Saturday down at Magnus Arena at DU. Easy to get to. Tickets available now at denverpioneers.com, but we're giving away a couple of them as well. So you go to the Mile High Sports Instagram account at Mile High Sports, and you will be able to win a pair of tickets to this weekend's LFA middleweight champion, that main event with the women's flyweight bout at Magnus. So go watch top tier MMA bouts this weekend at Magnus Arena, a small facility, great seats, great view, but the tickets could go quickly. Go to denverpioneers.com and Mile High Sports Instagram account at Mile High Sports to win your own. And while you're there, check out the interview of Mile High Sports with UFC champ Rose Namajunas as well. An opportunity to hear from the champ as Mile High Sports supports the fight game right here in Denver, where a lot of it, quite frankly, began. UFC 1, matter of fact, Nickel Sports Arena in Denver back in the day. So a long history of that here in Colorado. The WNBA finds itself in a wonderful position all of a sudden with Caitlin Clark, but not just Caitlin Clark. Of course, a tremendous rookie class. Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Camila Cardoso, Cameron Brink, all coming into the league. And that renaissance, of course, has, I think, primarily been laid at Clark's feet, though that's not entirely fair. The last matchup a couple nights ago with the Chicago Sky and the Indiana Fever, the Fever ended up winning that game. That's Clark's team. They lead the series with the Sky in the regular season 2-0. Again, kind of a fascinating matchup because Angel Reese and Cardoso, by the way, champion coming from South Carolina, they were both on the Chicago Sky.
Yeah.
So pretty impressive front court Chicago's assembled with Reese and Cardoso. Reese seems to be very comfortable with being the anti-Clark and taking the villain role, to the point she has actually said she's comfortable taking the villain role in this if Caitlin Clark is painted as the hero of the league. The Fever win this game, and Reese was more than a little bit frustrated with the officiating. You get to hear a little bit of it after the game from ESPN.
It's a basketball play. I can't control the refs. They affected the game obviously a lot tonight. So I'm always going for the ball, but y'all gonna play that clip 20 times before Monday. So it's cool. I think we went up really strong a lot of times and we didn't get a lot of calls. And going back at looking at the film, I've seen a lot of calls that weren't made. I guess some people got a special whistle, but just being able to play hard as best as we can. I'm still proud of Camila going on, still getting a double-double. And that's something y'all not going to be able to stop regardless of the referees. Like, we're here for a while. We're not going to be denied, it's no matter what you guys can try to do. But our goal is to win, and we're going to do whatever it takes to win and continue to do that.
What Reese is referring to is a flagrant one in that game where Clark was driving to the basket and Reese pushed her in the back and sent her spiraling into the floor.
Well, did more than push her in the back, hit her in the head.
Yeah, hit her in the head. And the initial call was then upgraded to a flagrant one, which quite frankly, I think any basketball observer goes, well, that's the right call. Not a huge deal.
There is not, I don't understand. And she seemed to be suggesting
that the fix is in.
Well, not just that, but if it's a basketball play, you can't possibly call a flagrant one.
Now,
I see that happen all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I see it in NBA games. I see it in other games, the WNBA. I've seen it. I've watched a little more of the WNBA. I've seen it. Even if you grant her that it was purely a basketball play and there was no wind up or, it could have been read as an attempt to block the shot. She made contact with the head. There is no distinction made in an either or sense. Either it's a basketball play or it's a flagrant one.
Right.
It can be both.
Mm-hmm.
It can be both.
Yeah.
If you grant her position that it was a basketball play or that was her intent, you can still call a flagrant one. She didn't get thrown out of the game.
Mm-hmm.
The game wasn't decided on the basis of that call. It wasn't the last play of the game that gave
and it wasn't
Fever
a
win they
game.
otherwise wouldn't have had.
Right.
The point is that the ratings for this game set a WNBA record over 23 years. So I heard Michael Wilbon of ESPN suggest yesterday, somewhat sardonically, maybe every time these two get together next year, they just make it that the entire schedule is made up of games between Reese's team and Clark's team. Well, they go up against each other 40 times.
That's the part that I'm intrigued about, because both players had pretty good games. Reese had a bad shooting day, but again, she was really good on the boards, and there is even an argument, quite frankly. Caitlin Clark, to her going back to that foul, by the way,
Clark said it was basketball.
Said it was a basketball play too. At the same time, the Fever's coach correctly said, but it was a flagrant.
It was also a flagrant.
So again, not a huge deal, but that there's a lot of sort of spice in there. And Reese, who was sort of the face of women's basketball 2 springs ago, before Clark started challenging a bunch of longtime records.
Right.
Challenging Maravich, getting into the top overall points, because Reese was really the face of college basketball, the most popular player off the championship team. No question about it. And it clearly bugs her and gets under her skin that she's not considered that anyway. The funny thing is, Reese arguably is having a better rookie season than Clark, and might very well, if you were just to line up a bunch of stats right now, be the person and say, don't look at the player, just look at the stats. You might pick Angel Reese and say, well, that's your rookie of the year. That is neither good, bad, nor indifferent. But the fact is that Reese, happily playing the villain, understands, and I give her some credit for this. I think there is some real jealousy there, but I think also understands, hey, that's okay. I can play the bad, I can play the villain, I can play the heavy, and I can keep my name in here too. And I guess I look at it and think, I was a little too young to really see how the league changed, but the NBA was essentially saved by Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, who had a great collegiate
that's not debatable.
And then Michael Jordan supercharged it a few years later. But it was Bird and Magic that made the league watchable again. The highest ratings in 23 years for the WNBA, Sandy. I look at that, and you're the perfect person to talk to about it. The first thing I thought of when I saw the ratings and I saw the post-game press conferences and watched part of the game, I thought, you know what? Clark and Reese might be the WNBA's Bird and Magic, in so much as they're the reason, and their rivalry and the way they put all of it together. Because you talked about
TV.
it. 40 games a year. When Reese and Clark play, the WNBA has completely broken through. It becomes the most interesting thing on television in sports.
Every time they play, it's going to be on. It's going to be on ESPN.
It's the most interesting story in sports that night, probably.
It absolutely.
Why would you not want to watch it?
And it came on the weekend. There's a lot going on. I can't say I watched the game from start to finish because I was watching the U.S. Open for a good portion of the afternoon. But I did see enough of it, and not 20 times did I go back and look at that play, as Reese suggested that everybody would do.
But she's not wrong.
But I went back and looked at it, and it's okay. It was a hard foul. Maybe the hit to the head made it harder than it should have been. But
and maybe it wasn't quite as hard as it looked. But
you can call it correctly, as these officials did, as both a basketball play and a flagrant 1 foul.
Right.
And Clark is clearly aware of all this stuff going on around her,
which is funny because 2 weeks ago,
she is leaning right into it and not giving anybody any fodder by which to contend that she is soft.
2-3 weeks ago wasn't the argument around the people who were kind of new to the WNBA going, how come the league isn't protecting Caitlin Clark? Right? Wasn't she taking too many hard hits, taking too many hard fouls? Well, not on Sunday. I mean, took a hard, it was to an extent a basketball play, and he made contact with the head, so it was adjudicated correctly. But
yes.
And that's the funny thing. There's this sound and fury, like you should overprotect Caitlin Clark because she's the golden goose. And then there's the idea that, well, no, I mean, she's a rookie. And the funny thing is, I think people look
and she gets special treatment.
Right. And the funny thing is, reality is it's probably right in the middle.
Yes. Yes. I don't think she gets special.
She takes
treatment.
a little. She also gives a little. You've pointed out before. There's a lot of
be protected.
John Stockton in Caitlin Clark's game.
There is,
for
and
good and for
even
ill.
from a trash talking point of view, I don't know that Stockton was a big trash talker.
Yeah, but he let you know at times
but
on
he
the way
gave
by.
you the educated elbow,
Right.
and she's more of a trash talker than
Right.
dirty from a physical sense, but she competes. And I think to a lot of the players, particularly the black players, the idea that she's squeaky clean, that's not something that she propagates. That's something that the media tends to emphasize.
It is worth noting
without
that there is
spending as much time talking about the trash talking.
Be totally foolish to ignore the idea and the reality that Caitlin Clark as a white athlete has certain advantages coming into this league in perception. That's simply true. And we can go over it. We'll take more shows than we have, but it's true. There is an advantage for that. There's a reason that Clark gets attention that Reese maybe did not get last year. And maybe that's an understandable point of contention for Reese. Just from a human nature standpoint, you could look at it and say, wait, I'm even having a better rookie year than Caitlin Clark.
Right.
And
she's on a better team.
Yeah, on a better team, playing a bigger role. It's fair. And that reality is part of this equation too. But it might be just as simple as the fact that I think people who haven't watched the WNBA are a little shocked that it's a more physical league pound for pound than the NBA.
Yes.
And people get kind of freaked out by it. But that's the way it is. The WNBA is actually a really physical league. It's more akin to the NBA in the 80s than today's NBA.
Oh.
And that's
Without
part of
question.
the equation too. So it's more complicated than that. But the one thing that is very good about it is it's very good for Caitlin Clark. It's very good for Angel Reese. And it's very good for the WNBA.
Absolutely.
Which makes it, quite frankly, pretty good for sports.
Yeah.
Because you know what? This time of year, when you're just watching the Colorado Rockies lose 12 of 16 games, and the Avalanche are done, and the Nuggets are done, and the Broncos don't start for a month, you might be looking for something to watch. Well, guess what? You might have found it. The WNBA might be the new thing for the summer that you're watching. Now, Denver just needs to decide to step up and get a team. And when the Nuggets and Avalanche owners decide they want one, they'll have one. There are no expansion plans when NBA owners decide they want to hop in. They get one. So that's really the next question to discuss for Denver and the WNBA. When does team ownership actually want to add one? But that's a discussion for another day, and one we don't have time for right now. It's been great to talk to you about all of this. Of course, the Rockies will take on the Dodgers tonight. We'll talk about that. Of course, Stanley Cup Final continues to go along. We'll discuss that tomorrow as well. Thanks to all of you who watched. Remember, there's that little click and subscribe button right down there. It's red. You can't miss it. Just go ahead and pick it. You'll get all the latest from us every single day. Thanks to Danny Bailey, who makes all of this work. But most of all, thanks to you for tuning in, watching, and listening. However you've done it, we appreciate it. And we hope to catch you back here tomorrow. For Sandy Clough, I'm Sean Drotar. This is Mile High Sports.